is the once a year where we do all Disney songs. So we get to relive our childhood dreams, especially we in the band. Growing up, the 10-year-old inside us really got excited. So hopefully you'll sing along. Maybe if you want, you can sit at the forefront and be a little more of a tighter congregation. You don't feel as much in the middle of nowhere when you sing Disney songs with us. We got the lyrics up here. Hopefully you join along. Bare necessities, those simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. I mean the bare necessities, oh Mother Nature's recipes to bring the bare necessities of life. Wherever I wander, wherever I roam, I couldn't be fonder of my big home. The bees are buzzing in the trees, make some honey just for me. When you look under the rocks and plants and take a glance at the fancy ants and maybe try a few, the bare necessities of life will come to you. They'll come to you. Now I'm the king of those swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I've reached the top and I had to stop, and that's what's bothering me. I want to be a man cub, stroll right into town, and be just like the other men. I'm tired of monkeying around. Oh, whoopie-doo, I want to be like you. I want to walk like you, talk like you. You see it's true, and a black me can learn to be human too. If your mannerisms will be a set of twins, no one will know when man cub ends and orangutan begins. And when I eat bananas, I will not peel them with my feet, and I will be a new man cub and learn some etiquette. Oh, I want to be like you. I want to walk like you, talk like you. You see it's true, and it's like me. And learn to be human too. I can learn to be like someone like you. One more time. I can learn to be human too. Thank you. Band, go ahead and hang out on stage a little bit. Thank you for coming to Sunday Assembly. Do we have any first-timers here? First Sunday Assembly? Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the returners. Sunday Assembly is sort of our ongoing experiment. We've been here about a year and a half. Our Godless Assembly, basically all the good things about a church, minus the religious aspects. We're trying to build a community here and experimenting with how we might do that, how we might build the religious infrastructure without the religion. And we're so thankful to have you join us. Yes, it's Disney Day. I'm sorry if any of you were hoping that we'd play a Disney song that we didn't play. There were lots of ones that we really wanted to. Circle of Life. We tried to do Prince Ali. What's that? They're really hard. Oh, man, Disney songs are hard. Because most of them are done in full orchestration, right? So when you put it to a 4-piece band, it's tricky. It's tricky a little bit. So what's some of the others we tried to do? Well, if you want to see some other Disney stuff, go on YouTube. All of our assemblies are on YouTube. And last April, we did a Disney set. We did Under the Sea. We did Let It Go. And with Let It Go, we tried to invite all the kids up on stage because Frozen had just come out. And I had a bet with some of my bandmates whether or not any kids would actually come up, would actually have the guts to do it. We didn't have any of the kids. We had like 10 kids that all said they were going to, but came to it, they got too scared. I won the bet. We also played Son of Man from Tarzan. And so in a year from now, hopefully you'll be back and we'll do a whole new set of Disney songs. So next up, we have some Lion King. You ready, Zazu? Gonna be a mighty king, so enemies beware.
Well, I've never seen seen a king of beasts with quite so little hair.
Gonna be the main event, but no king was before. Looking up, I'm brushing down, working on my roar.
Thus far, a rather uninspiring thing.
Oh, I just can't wait to be king.
A rather long way to go, young man, if you think that
No one's saying do this.
Well, no, when I said that, it's
No
not
one's
what I
saying
meant.
be there.
No, well, listen.
No one's saying stop that.
Now stop and listen.
No one's saying be here.
Now see here.
Free to run around all day.
Well, that's out of the question.
I'll be free to do it my way.
I think it's time that you and I arranged a heart-to-heart.
Kings don't need advice from little hornbills for a start.
This is where the monarchy is headed. Count me out. Out of service, out of Africa, I wouldn't hang about. This child is getting wildly out of wing.
Oh, I just can't wait to be king. Everybody look left, everybody look right. Everywhere you look, I'm standing spotlight.
Not yet.
And every creek go sing. Let's hear it in the herd and on the wing. It's gonna be King Simba's finest day. Oh, I just can't wait to be king. Oh, I just can't wait to be king. Oh, I just can't wait to be king.
Every Sunday assembly, we build, obviously there's a lot of music, and we think music is an essential part of being a part of a community. We also have opportunities for a member of the congregation to speak. And so we're going to start off with a reading from Mike May. He's going to read Thanatopsis.
So I don't want to destroy this lively spirit by talking about death, but that's the topic of my reading. So Thanatopsis, I read this poem in high school, and I really appreciate its distinctive view on death from a naturalistic perspective. So here it goes. To him who in the love of nature holds communion with her visible form, she speaks a various language. For his gayer hours she has a voice of gladness and a smile and eloquence of beauty, and she glides into his darker musings with a mild and gentle sympathy that steals away their sharpness ere he is aware. When thoughts of the last bitter hour come like a blight over thy spirits, and sad images of the stern agony enshroud and pall, in breathless darkness and the narrow house, make thee to shudder and grow sick at heart. Go forth under the open sky, and list to nature's teachings, while from all around earth and her waters, in the depths of air, comes a still voice. Yet a few days, and thee, the all-beholding sun, shall see no more. In all his course, nor yet in the cold ground, where thy pale form was laid with many tears, nor in the embrace of ocean shall exist thy image. Earth that nourished thee shall claim thy growth to be resolved to earth again, and lost each human trace, surrendering up thine individual being, shalt thou go to mix forever with the elements, to be a brother to the insensible rock, and to the sluggish clod, which the rude swain turns with his share and treads upon. The oak shall send his roots abroad and pierce thy mold, yet not to thy eternal resting place shalt thou retire alone, nor couldst thou wish couch more magnificent. Thou shalt lie down with patriarchs of the infant world, with kings, the powerful of the earth, the wise, the good, fair forms and hoary seers of ages past, all in one mighty sepulchre. The hills rock-ribbed and ancient as the sun, the vales stretching in pensive quietness between. The vernal woods, rivers that move in majesty, and the complaining brooks that make the meadows green and poured round all. Old ocean's gray and melancholy waste are but the solemn decorations all of the great tomb of man. The golden sun, the planets, all the infinite host of heaven are shining on the sad abodes of death. Through the still lapse of ages, all that tread the globe are but a handful to the tribes that slumber in its bosom. Take the wings of morning and the Barcan desert pierce, or lose thyself in the continuous woods where rolls the Oregon and hears no sound. Save his own dashings, yet the dead are there, and millions in those solitudes, since the flight of years began, have laid them down in their last sleep. The dead reign there alone. So shalt thou rest, and what if thou shalt fall unnoticed by the living, and no friend take note of thy departure? All that breathe will share thy destiny. The gay will laugh when thou art gone, the solemn brood of care plod on, and each one, as before, will chase his favorite phantom. Yet all these shall leave their mirth and their employments, and shall come to make their bed with thee. As the long train of ages glides away, the sons of men, the youth in life's green spring, and he who goes in the full strength of years, matron and maid, the bowed with age, the infant in the smiles and the beauty of its innocent age cut off, shall one by one be gathered to thy side, by those who in their turn shall follow them. So live, that when thy summons comes to join the innumerable caravan that moves to the pale realms of shade, where each shall take his chamber in the silent halls of death, thou go not like the quarry slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust. Approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams.
Thank you, Mike. I wasn't actually familiar with that poem, but I had heard the name Thanatopsis. When I was in high school, I had a friend that was in a death metal band, and one of the names of their song was Thanatopsis, and I had no idea why. Thank you. Next up, so there are lots of Sunday assemblies in the country, but the one thing that we've sort of started is called Why Sunday Assembly. It takes the place of some of the other things that other Sunday assemblies in the country do, but it's an opportunity for somebody in the congregation to tell their personal story, and sometimes an opportunity to have a soapbox for a little while, really to just have 5-10 minutes to do whatever they want to do. And if you'd like to do that, or if you'd like to give a reading, go ahead and sign up near the end of the counter over by the coffee. We have sign-up sheets for volunteers, or if you want to speak at the assembly. If you'll see on the program, it has me doing Why Sunday Assembly. That's because I'm a producer, and so I'm the backup. So I'm the MC because our MC wasn't able to come today. And we also lost our Why Sunday Assembly person, so I was going to do it. But fortunately, we heroically got Lucas to volunteer to do Why Sunday Assembly. So everybody, Lucas Alvarez.
I'm really glad to have been asked at somewhat short notice to give the Why Sunday Assembly this month during Disney Songs Month because it's really important to me. The TLDR version of my Why Sunday Assembly is coffee and donuts and Disney songs. Thank you. That's why I'm here. The somewhat longer version of my story, though, is that when I left the church a good 10 years or so ago, I knew that there would be things I would miss about being a mainline liberal Protestant, and so tried to go systematically through, bit by bit, filling all those holes in my life. So I wanted a connection to something greater than myself, so I started volunteering on a regular basis. I wanted to be able to engage in a deep and meaningful level with serious texts. I joined a book club. I wanted to lose myself in the energy of the crowd and chant things that made no sense. I go to a couple of White Sox games a season. But this isn't really about why atheism in general. This is about why Sunday Assembly. And a big thing there are several wonderful things that Sunday Assembly offers me really particularly. It's coffee and donuts and Disney songs, but it's a sense of community. We meet in a Puerto Rican cultural space. Like, did you guys design this around me specifically? There's a preponderance of people who attend who also went to my same weird university. But it isn't actually just about me, even. There's coffee and donuts and Disney songs for everyone. And this is really the kernel of my sort of conversion story to Sunday Assembly. I found out about Sunday Assembly when I was not living in Chicago anymore. I was in Washington, D.C., a town where there is no Sunday Assembly. And it broke my heart, because I was seeing this on Facebook. I had friends that were having a great time. And the thing that just absolutely broke the camel's back was one of them posted, "There's coffee and donuts and Disney songs this month, and we're going to do this." And I started talking about it all the time to everyone who would listen. And I'm not one of those guys that walks around all day going, atheist, atheist, atheist. I'm pretty shy and pretty quiet about it, because it's a scary world out there. There are people that really hate atheists. The Pew Research Center did a study last year that found that like 20% of people would be really upset if someone in their family married someone that was of the other political party. We have a lot of complaints about our terrible and broken polarized political system, and that shows up there. 20% of people would just be heartbroken, like if their sister married someone from the other party. 49% would be upset if they married an atheist. People really hate atheists. But Sunday Assembly gives me a really great avenue to say atheist, atheist, atheist in a coffee, donuts, and Disney songs way, and not in a big jerk way. I told my boss about this. Hey, I joined the band in my atheist church, and he was like, oh, cool. I told my mom about this, who's still a Christian, who sings in the choir at church, and she was like, you have a merry band of atheists? That's so cool. I tell my friends, I tell my coworkers, I'm totally much more able to, in an easy way, be out about being an atheist. And this is going to help broadly, because what we've got is we've got coffee, we've got donuts, and we've got Disney tunes. Every time I come here, I learn something from our interesting speakers. I've made friends. This has really massively improved my life. One weekend a month, I can barely contain how much joy this brings to me. So I also wanted to say that in every single one of those mainline liberal Protestant congregations that I have been a member of, I can personally attest there is a large contingent that is there for the coffee, the donuts, and the music. I can, for the first time in my life, not have to lie about that. What we've got is great. What we got is well established. This is a method, coffee, donuts, good music, that works. Broadly, it can work for us. I'm standing before you as a testimonial that this is a great thing.
Thank you, Lucas. That was awesome. I also feel like Sunday Assembly was sort of made for me as a musician, and I'm a grad student in the sciences, and I have no opportunity to do gigs. But just the idea that, and I've been an atheist activist for about 8 years in the Chicago area, that you can combine the music and the atheism part was just about the coolest thing for me, and that keeps me coming every week. Ben, you guys want to come back up? We're going to do another Disney song. Are there any metal fans in the audience? Anyone likes to listen to metal? We got one. I hope that you will bear with us, the rest of us. We are metal fans, and we can't play metal at a Sunday Assembly. You can't do that, right? We don't even have the sound. Everybody was just like, oh my God, I'm going to blow angels. So we figured if we convert a Disney song that sort of makes sense as a metal song into a metal song, that would be a little, we could do that. Maybe we could get away with that. So, you know, it's over the top. It's epic. It's supposed to be that way. Hopefully you'll sing along with us, and that'll make it a little bit more Sunday Assembly.
I'm actually not a metalhead, but this is from Disney's preeminent trouser roll, so it's also like perfect camp. So just sing along. This will be awesome.
Let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. Did they send me daughters when I asked for sons? You're the saddest bunch I ever met. But you can bet before we're through. How could I make a man out of you? Tranquil as a forest, but a fire within. Once you find your center, you are sure to win. You're a spineless, pale, pathetic lot, and you haven't got a clue. Mister, I'll make a man out of you. Boys, I fool in school for cutting Jim. This guy's got him scared to death. Hope he doesn't see right through me. Now to swim, be a man. You must be swift at the coursing river. With all the force of a great typhoon. Be a man. With all the strength of a raging fire. Mysterious as the dark side of the moon. Time is racing towards us, till the hunt arrives. Heed my every order, and you might survive. You're suited for the rage of war, so pack up, go home, you're through. How could I make a man out of you? Be swift as a coursing river, with all the force of a great typhoon, with all the strength of a raging fire, mysterious as the dark side of the moon. Be a man. You must be swift as a coursing river, with all the force of a great typhoon, be a man. With all the strength of a raging fire, mysterious as the dark side of the moon. Thank you for indulging us. Thank you. Now to the man that you all came to see. Our guest speaker today, every Sunday Assembly we have a major guest speaker, is Joey Savoie. He's the co-founder of Charity Science. You can read about his bio. I won't waste your time. Let's just hear from Joey. Ready to go?
Hello? Great. So I first wanted to say that it's really exciting to see a Sunday Assembly because we don't have one in Vancouver, where I'm from, sadly, although I think they are working on getting one together. So I'll just wait till that's set up. Yeah, so it's really exciting to be here in Chicago and actually get to see the music, and the music's really great. My fiance in particular is a massive fan of Disney songs, so it's almost like we planned the trip perfectly to arrive at the right Sunday Assembly of all of them. Yeah. Okay, great. And now I have the slides too, so that will help the presentation a lot. So today I wanted to talk to everybody about kind of a skeptic's guide to charity, applying skepticism, scientific thinking, and critical thought to a sector which unfortunately is not very scientific a lot of the time. So science is this, next slide please. Thanks. Science is this incredibly powerful tool that's been ruining things for a long time, but also making us more informed and smarter in our decisions. So it's revolutionized everything from astronomy to biology, and it can also be used in the charity field. So the one I put in the middle there is Homeopaths Without Borders. And what they do is they're a lot like Doctors Without Borders. They go into a country, often a developing world country, and suggest that instead of using something like vaccines, they take homeopathic medicine. So as you can imagine, this can result in a lot of harm, a lot of deaths, and this is a real charity. You can get tax deductibility by donating to it. and it's out there. With charities like this, it's not really a surprise that the question comes up, is aid, is charity even a good thing? Or is it a bad thing? Does it actually hurt the very people we're trying to help? And there's a lot of kind of strong proponents and intelligent people on both sides. There's books written about how aid is bad and how poverty might be this vacuum where it just keeps absorbing money, and yet we still have poverty year after year. And there's lots of terrible examples of aid gone wrong. One example I'm going to focus on here is called play pumps. And this was an interesting idea that got lots of media attention and lots of people really excited. The idea was to build kind of a child's playground that could be used, the momentum of the playground could be used to pull up water and store it so that it could later be accessed. Because a big problem in the developing world is using hand pumps to pull up the water from the ground. It's a big stress and a lot of manual labor. So it seemed like a very cool idea. You get playground equipment for the kids and you get water for the rest of the community. However, it was an abysmal failure. Basically why it was a failure is because the playground equipment got very heavy once it was attached to the water systems. It wasn't fun to play with. That you didn't get the same momentum that you would on a standard merry-go-round or anything that swings around. So the kids never played on it. So of course, the rest of the community, mostly the women of the community, had to push this massive, heavy playground around to get a tiny percentage of water that they would have got with just a standard hand pump. So this is a scary example of aid gone wrong, and unfortunately, it's just one of hundreds of examples. There's lots of aid and charity that does exactly this, does absolutely nothing or even harms the community that it's trying to help, which is a big problem. On the other hand, we have a lot of expert opinions talking about how aid is great. Aid has helped lots of people in the past. It's done all sorts of good things. Lots of books have been written about success stories, and they argue that why poverty still exists, why these problems still exist, is we actually haven't given enough. We haven't actually done that much when you look at the grand scale of humanity. And when you add it up, we've only actually given $33 per person to the very poor. And that's for education, healthcare, food, shelter, everything. So you can imagine it doesn't get very far. And they can point to amazing examples of success stories of aid. So one of the most notable success stories is with malaria. Malaria is this disease that's carried by mosquitoes. Yet another reason to hate mosquitoes. They carry all sorts of terrible infectious diseases. And they bite someone and give them this parasite, which is a huge killer of humanity, one of the top killers of humanity across all of time. And it mostly kills children under 5. So it's a particularly devastating disease in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have made huge progress in curing and preventing malaria because there's really cheap ways to deal with it. For $3, you can get an insecticide-treated bed net, put it over someone's bed, and thankfully the mosquitoes mostly come out at night, the malaria-carrying ones, and it can reduce the malaria rate hugely. $3, incredibly cheap. And this is a big example of aid success stories. Between this and other interventions, malaria has actually gone down 80%, which is fantastic. Millions of lives saved. So how do we reconcile these two opinions? We have good examples, we have bad examples of aid working. Well, like most kind of black and white questions, it's not a black and white question. The real question is, how do we find good charity? How do we find charity that does actually work, that has science and evidence backing it up? How do we really support what actually works in the world? So first off, let's think about a methodology we might use when normally selecting charity, our intuition. We're actually going to play a little game with the audience, and we're going to read out some kind of information about charities, or list it out here. And I want everyone to think about in their head whether this charity is effective, neutral, so has no effect, or actually harms the people they're trying to help. And you can just think of it in your head. Sometimes I get people to write it down. I'm actually going to have to get a little bit closer to see what's going on. Do I have a board? I can gesture here as well. So the first charity we're going to evaluate is the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And basically, it's a big government program. Low-income people have a safe place to go after school to get help with homework and recreational activities. And we're going to evaluate it on 2 different metrics. So we're going to look at both learning and behavior. So does it help people learn better? Does it help them perform more effectively? And does it reduce behavioral problems in class? And you can think in your head whether you think this would have a positive effect, a neutral effect, or a negative effect. And I'll just give you 1 second to think about it. And then I can reveal the answers. So the answer is for learning, it has a neutral effect. It actually does nothing. It's basically just a waste of money. And for behavior, surprisingly, it actually has a negative effect. And it's complicated, and often you don't even know why a program might have a negative or positive effect. How could this have a negative effect? But charity interventions are really complicated. So the next one, the nurse-family partnership. Maybe some of you have heard of this very popular intervention. Nurses are sent to the homes of first-time low-income mothers, and they basically visit them once a month and educate them on health-related behaviors and how to take care of their child better and deal with the medical side of it. Yeah. So again, the question is the same. Is this a positive effect, neutral effect, or negative effect? I'll give you just a second to think about it, and we can reveal the answer. So the nurse-family partnership is a positive effect. It does help a lot, and there's a lot of evidence showing that it really does help. It really does help the mothers have better health outcomes. Next one, Scared Straight. This is a crime prevention program, and basically it's where they get inmates into the classroom to tell very kind of scary, graphic stories about what prison is like. And it's scary. They talk about rape and murder and the prison culture, and they go to vulnerable schools and talk about this. So again, think in your head, does this help? Does this neutral, or does it hurt? And the answer is, it's negative. It actually largely increases crime rates. Some theories are maybe it normalizes crime. Maybe it makes the convicts or prisoners seem more role model-y or someone they could actually imagine themselves being. Next program is called DARE. Again, another very popular program. Uniformed police officers come in and give all sorts of information about drugs. So they talk about weekly training, they talk about drug use, they build self-confidence for the students in the class, and do a whole host of other things over a long period of time to try to get people to not use drugs. So again, think in your head, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative. The answer is neutral. So it has no effect, unfortunately, even though it's a very expensive program to run in schools. The next one, Even Start Family Literacy Program. So this is a program run across the United States that helps break the cycle of poverty by providing literacy education. It's targeted at low-income adults and children, and it teaches parents literacy skills as well as how to teach literacy skills to their children. Once again, positive, neutral, or negative. Take your guesses, and let's see it. Neutral. No big effect. Surprising. A lot of similar programs do have effects, but it does depend a lot on the program. Finally, or no, there's two more, I think, right? Okay. So Big Brothers and Big Sisters, program I actually had taken part in as a youth. Basically, you're paired with a mentor, and the mentor isn't supposed to pressure you to do anything in particular, just provide a supportive, kind of nurturing relationship, someone you can talk to. Often the mentor is college educated, someone relatively successful by standard metrics. Does this have a positive effect, neutral, or negative? So everyone can think in their head. It has a positive effect, this one. Quite a positive effect, which is great. And the final one, we have 16 educational softwares. And we couldn't actually fit all the qualifications of this one on a single slide. But they're top-rated education systems. They've won tons of awards. They're actually based off research, previous research, and they're basically educational programs targeted at improving all educational outcomes, math, literacy, stuff like that. So again, think in your head, positive, neutral, or negative. This one I got wrong when I first did the game. You can reveal the answer, neutral, no effect, even though a lot of them are based off previous research. So it's really shocking. When we look at these interventions, you probably got some right, and you probably got some wrong. And why that is, that's what we find everywhere, regardless of whether they're college educated, high school, even educated in the charity sector, unless you know about the specific charities that we're talking about. And basically why that is because it's very hard to know whether something's actually doing good or bad off such a small amount of information. And yet, this is normally how we make decisions about charities. We see a 2-minute commercial, or we have someone come to our door or talk to us in the street. We're judging off a very small amount of information, and our intuitions are frankly just not that good. Most people score right around what you'd expect with chance. So in a big enough audience, someone gets them all right, but someone else gets them all wrong. And this isn't even the hard part. This is just talking about whether they're good, neutral, or bad, not to mention what's the best at any given thing. I mean, if we had to order them from best to worst, that'd be even more challenging. Or if we took into account that there's thousands of charities, not just 8 or 7. So we need to think a little bit, back up here. We need to think a little bit more strategically about how to approach charity selection, how we look at how to do good. And we do actually have another methodology other than our intuition. We in fact use this methodology when it comes to drugs, medical drugs and interventions. It's the scientific method. It's studies, randomized control trials, comparing against the placebo, peer review. We have all this structure of how to really figure out whether something works or doesn't that we use in the medical community. And this exact same type of techniques can be used for a lot of interventions in the charity sector. So to give one example of a specific charitable intervention that was tested is we'll go back to bed nets and malaria. Now there's lots of different studies, lots of randomized control trials showing that bed nets are really great at stopping malaria from infecting a community. But there's a lot of different variations within that. For example, should we give bed nets away for free? Should we just give them to anyone who needs them or anyone who's in a high malaria rate? Or should we charge for them? Would this make someone value the bed net more, maybe use it more effectively, even if it lowers the percentage of people that use it? This is something that's really easy to run a randomized control trial on, the scientific method. So there actually was a study run on this, and what they did was they handed out vouchers randomly to different people in different communities, either offering bed nets for free or offering bed nets at some sort of discount. So they tried different discount levels, a 10% discount, 50% discount, 90% discount even, to see what the results were. Then they came back several months later to see what were the usage rates of the bed nets, which communities had less malarial infections, how much did the usage rates drop if you even charged 10 cents for a bed net. And what they found after looking at all the research is that more or less giving it for free was a much better move. So virtually everyone used the bed nets properly. They didn't actually use it for fishing nets or wedding veils. They didn't waste it. They didn't sell it to other people, which are big concerns. And people took care of them really thoroughly. They, in fact, even came back years later and tried to sell bed nets to see if maybe people would get used to handouts and not be willing to spend the appropriate money. And it turns out the people who got it for free were just as willing to buy it again. In fact, even a little bit more so. It turns out people get used to bed nets. People don't get used to handouts. So this is kind of a surprising result, and it could really affect what malaria charity we support. Generally, people giving it out for free does a lot better than people giving it out at cost, even a very small cost. So this is one example of the scientific method being used for charitable interventions. There's actually entire organizations that just focus on that. So Innovation for Poverty Action, JPAL, they're great organizations, and they basically just run studies and studies and studies and studies trying to figure out what actually helps people, what's the effect of different interventions. And that's really fantastic for a researcher like me. I really like to look at their research. However, it's not super useful for most of the public. They're long, they're technical, they require a charity background, and it's really hard to kind of compile them together. So there's another resource, which is great, called GiveWell. And a lot of skeptics and humanists have even heard of GiveWell because people really like them, and for good reason. They take all the research from those organizations, or a lot of the research, and try to compile it into more specific conclusions. Stuff like, if we wanted to help people in the developing world with their health care, what would we support? What specific charity, what specific intervention has the most evidence and helps the most people in a cost-effective way? And GiveWell's really considered the gold standard in charity research. They are very, very thorough. Their summaries are often 50 pages plus. Very detailed work, and I highly recommend checking out their website if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty details of it. Finally, there's Charity Science, which is the organization I founded with my fiancée, Zio. And basically, we're kind of the popular science of this information. So GiveWell and IPA are doing wonderful research and really coming to great conclusions, but it's in a very technical format. So one of the big things we do is we try to translate it to English from science. So often when you read a science paper or even GiveWell, although it's a little bit better, it's pretty technical. It might look something like that. There's a lot of Greek letters. There's a lot of jargon that not everyone would know, especially people who haven't spent 5 years researching charity stuff. And we try to turn it into something more like that. A simple picture, a paragraph, something that would be helpful for someone who has 10 minutes or 1 minute even, instead of having to dedicate a year to getting a sense of the terminology. So that's one thing Charity Science does. We basically try to allow people to find the gems in the charity world amongst all the charities that do either no good or even do some good, but very inefficiently. We all have limited time and resources. It's really important to try to prioritize the ones that actually do the most good instead of working on something that just does a little bit of good. And that kind of leads us to the goal, which is we want to help the most people we can. If we have $100, how many people can we really help? If we're strategic, we can help a lot more. That's the real point of Charity Science, to help more people. And finally, as I mentioned before, it saves people time. So GiveWell is a huge time saver. You don't have to look through all the research, and Charity Science is a further time saver on GiveWell, where you don't even have to read a 50-page summary. You can just read a one-page summary or a paragraph summary and kind of get a sense of what the evidence is pointing to in the charity sector. So we actually have a newsletter that Zio is going to pass around for anyone who might be interested in this sort of stuff. We try to make it really easy for any level of research knowledge or scientific knowledge, and we try to include ways to learn more and ways to take action to help the world in a positive way in every newsletter. So one of the other things we do, and I should mention this because it will probably come up in the next newsletter if anyone signs up, is we run events to try to spread the idea of scientific charities and using the scientific method applied to charity. So one event we're running right now is called Experience Poverty. And the idea is, instead of running a marathon or doing some other event to show that you're dedicated to a charity, you try to live off $2.50 American a day for food. So this is a little bit, the idea is to get a little bit of a sample of what living in developing world poverty might be like. Of course, it's way, way easier to live off $2.50 a day on food because we don't have to deal with medical costs or health or anything. But I tried to pitch the challenge where everyone lives on the street and spends $1 on food for medicine, and no one signed up. So we picked the more moderate version. But this is a really great way to talk to other people and spread the idea of some charities might be hundreds of times more effective than others. Some charities might really make a difference. And then, of course, because it's a fundraiser, all the proceeds don't go to Charity Science. They go to one of the charities directly in the field that makes a difference. One that covers parasitic worms, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So I've been talking about kind of good charities in the abstract, but I want to take some time to actually talk about some good charities, because, what is a good charity? What does it look like? What are the charities we really want to support? So often we can start with a question. For example, say we really care about developing world education. We can think, what intervention might most affect this? Because there's lots of ideas out there. There's scholarships, there's school uniforms, there's hiring teachers, there's building schools. There's hundreds of interventions, all aimed at basically the same goal, getting a higher education rate in the developing world education. And we can even compare and contrast these to find which ones give us the best bang for buck. Surprisingly, the answer is actually a health intervention, deworming people of parasitic worms. That's pretty weird. That's not a conclusion you'd imagine if you just saw a list of educational interventions. But it turns out sickness, especially parasitic worms, are so prevalent in many areas, and they're so cheap to treat, you really can get a lot more bang for the buck. So how much more bang? Oh, sorry. We can go there. I know it's not a really sexy intervention as well. Just below socks with sandals is where deworming. It's pretty gross to talk about, and you're not going to see it on mainstream media channels a lot of the time. It's also pretty technical and complicated. The interventions are complex. But it's a really great intervention. So to compare exactly how far you get for $100, we can look at the different interventions in terms of months of education acquired. So we can see there that certain interventions provide more months than others. So surprisingly, school uniforms provide more education per dollar than scholarships do. This might be because you have to have a school uniform to go to many developing world schools. And although it's very cheap, it prevents people from going. However, how does this compare to the most effective intervention? It's not even close. It's 6 months compared to 14 years of education. It's orders of magnitude different. And that's basically because some interventions are way, way cheaper than other interventions. So school uniforms may be cheap, but deworming only costs 50 cents to cure someone of parasitic worms for a whole year. It's really hard to get that kind of level of cost effectiveness with building a school or hiring a teacher, even in the developing world. Also, a great thing about deworming is it has tons of studies on it. A lot of medical and global health interventions we've done a lot of research on, so we have a good sense of how they work and how effective they are. There's actually dozens of randomized control trials on deworming and parasitic worms and how it affects education outcomes. Another great thing, it doesn't just affect education outcomes. It doesn't just affect education attendance, sorry. It also affects outcomes. People do better in school. Again, somewhat intuitive. You're probably not going to perform your best if you're very sick while going to school. It also increases income, both in the long term and short term. More education equals more income in the long term, but in the short term, once again, if you're sick, you can't work. And if the sickness is very cheap to prevent, you can get that benefit. And I can't quite see what that is. Oh yeah, right, it's a picture of the worms themselves. And it gets rid of parasitic worms, which is great, and they're infectious, so it can reduce the whole burden of disease as well. So that's a really great intervention, and one that's quite surprising, especially when you're thinking about education reform. Another one that's surprisingly effective is cash transfers. This is fancy economic speaks for just giving someone money and letting them decide what to do with it. This kind of surprised me. I wouldn't have guessed this would have been effective either, but there's now overwhelming evidence that it's really good in a whole number of different ways. For one, it increases income, again, both long-term and short-term. Obviously, short-term it makes sense because you just handed someone a whole pile of cash, but in the long term, it turns out a lot of people make business investments or invest in something that changes their reoccurring cost of living. So a lot of people replace their thatch roofs with tin roofs. Thatch roofs you have to replace once every year. So there's a constant cost with it, where once you replace it with the tin or iron sheet roofs, you don't have to. Another benefit is it reduces hunger. Not surprising, a lot of people spend their money on food, basic food. It also increases, decreases domestic violence and increases women empowerment in the household. It turns out having financial problems is a big stress, both in the first world and the developing world. And finally, probably because of all those things, it really increases the happiness of the people, even in the long term. There's a saying that money can't buy happiness, and that actually is mostly true here, where we are, in the first world, people making very large sums of money. But if we're talking in the third world, where you really are struggling to have enough food to eat or really are struggling to have a decent shelter, a small amount of money really can make a huge difference. So those are some examples of great charities, but this really is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of charitable interventions and scientific research. We are going through a scientific revolution in the charity sector, similar to when medicine started moving from stuff like leaching to stuff like vaccines. There's a huge difference when using scientific methodology. You can even look at problems like poverty and think about what science might do to them. We've applied science to other problems that are global menaces, stuff like smallpox, and we've gotten rid of diseases. We've actually eliminated many diseases and eradicated a few. Using the same scientific techniques, we could work towards eliminating poverty as well. Thank you. I don't know what we're doing for time, but yeah, I do have time for questions, if anyone has any questions. Sure.
So, how much of the failure of charities is with respect to administration as opposed to actually the end goal?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, actually, and I should have addressed that in my talk now that I'm thinking about it. A lot of people think about overhead as the biggest problem in charity. It's very small compared to the actual intervention not working. So there definitely are some bad charities out there that waste all of their money, pay their CEOs 100 times more than what you'd expect, and are kind of scamming people that way. But that's by far not the most common problem. The most common problem is people spending tons of money on interventions that simply aren't proven. So they might work, they might not, but we just have no evidence. And you can imagine handing out hundreds of pounds of medicine that has no evidence for it, what kind of result that would end up with. So overhead can be a problem. It's focused on way too much as a problem compared to the bigger issue, which is wasteful spending in terms of the actual intervention itself.
What about waste after the fact? So the idea of 4A is getting fed up by some middleman and spilling back to that.
Yeah, so again, depends on the charity, but I would still say it's relatively small compared to it going to ineffective interventions. And the best charities have systems to deal with it. So they have ways of tracking my favorite malaria charity, for example, tracks every one of its nets from start to finish, and they survey them 6 months after, a year after, 2 years after, 3 years after, and they can see what people are actually distributing, how much they say, and when 100,000 nets go missing. So the best charities, no problems with that. Even the weaker charities, again, it's a small problem compared to focusing on something completely ineffective. Yeah. Yeah, so it depends a lot on the country. I'm from Canada. Our laws are a bit more restrictive. In America, it's pretty easy, honestly. I mean, there's a national cheese charity that's founded by the dairy industry, right? I mean, there's really, you have to state that you have charitable purpose, but it's pretty easy to become a 501c3. I definitely wouldn't look at that as saying that it actually does any good or actually is effective, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. And the answer is, basically, no matter what, you're not going to be able to treat everybody. So if you only have enough money for 100 bed nets, say, as a distribution, when you're running an RCT, you just take 200 people as the sample and then give 100 bed nets to those people. So basically, because of the RCT, you're not deciding to give less bed nets most of the time. Most of the time, it's being done in conjunction with the other charitable intervention, and you just use the group who, sadly, you don't have enough resources to help everybody. So that's how the RCTs work. I saw a question. Yeah. So government programs are a whole different kettle of fish, but they definitely do have a lot of the same problems. Some governments are really, really good at dealing with it. DFID in the UK is kind of known as kind of very good at distributing their charity and thinking about metrics and looking at what really works. US aid, not as much. Canada aid, not as much. So there's huge rooms for improvement. It's really hard to work in that system, though. It's a much slower system to change than individual donors thinking more thoughtfully, especially when even a lot of, I would say, like intelligent, skeptical-minded people don't currently apply skepticism to charity. Yeah, so unfortunately, RCTs are incredibly varied. So it depends on what effects you're looking for. If you're looking for short-term effects like medical differences in the next year, the RCT might only run for a year. But a lot of the time, they're very, very long. It might take 3, 5, 15 years to get good results on lots of interventions. A lot of these studies that I'm talking about were started way, way long time ago, and we're just getting in the results now. It also depends on how confident you are in the intervention. So if someone ran an intervention study on bed nets, they wouldn't have to be quite as thorough as you would if you were discovering just a new intervention, because there's so much research backing it up and supporting, say, long-term effects. You don't have to, the studies wouldn't be as long then, but when you're studying a new intervention, especially if you're looking for, say, like long-term income effects 20 years down the line, I mean, the study has to be 20 years. That's the only way of finding those effects. So average range, I mean, it's always years. Even if the study comes back after months, it's years to create the study, analyze the data, publish it. It's a long time. It's a long process, but it's really worth it. You can see it's hundreds of times more effective if you figure it out. And there's a lot of evidence already out there. I'm very in favor of more studies and research being used, but I'm even more in favor of actually applying the studies we already know. We've already studied stuff like bed nets. It's kind of obviously more effective than a lot of other interventions. Yeah, so I'm not aware of many effective charities using crowdsourcing types of fundraising. Unfortunately, a lot of the best charities, they're run by academics. They're boring. They're technical. They're really not fun to market. I know, because I talk about them. They kind of, that's their weakness, I would say. If a cause was really, really effective and really, really good at marketing, it would get funded. So most of the least funded areas are causes that are boring or gross or hard to explain or counterintuitive a lot of the time. So I don't know if they would benefit from a Kickstarter platform, but they might. It is individual donors that's shifting the charitable giving. So if you look at GiveWell, they've been doubling every year for the last 9 years or something, and now they're moving a pretty stellar amount of money, in the $35 million range. And that's because once you start thinking about charity and skepticism in this way, it's hard to go back. It's hard to start thinking about it in any other way, and you do end up talking to people about it and saying, oh, you're donating there? Huh, why are you donating there? Have you thought about this? And it really does change. So I think getting the word out to a lot of people is super important, but it's also tricky, especially for the charities themselves who are very, very knowledgeable in their specific niche area, maybe less knowledgeable at stuff like public speaking, crowdfunding, any sort of marketing type stuff. So I would say small disagreements, broad agreement. A lot of the stuff is obviously better than a lot of other stuff. I mean, say there's two GiveWell recommended charities, I might think one is slightly better than the other, but they're both in the top 1%. And even, I showed some research organizations, they even broadly agree with GiveWell's conclusions too. There's a lot of consensus as to the most effective stuff. It gets trickier when you get into areas with less evidence. So say you really want to support animal rights. There's just not as much evidence in that field. It's not as studied as global health. Opinions start diverging a lot more. But with stuff like developing world education, developing world health, there's a lot of research. It's really easy to kind of come to a consensus, even among people who have different starting points. Yeah.
Joey's going to hang out afterwards, right?
I absolutely will.
We're going to eat tacos and stuff, so please talk to him afterwards. Let's all thank him. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, so we have one last Disney song of the evening. This is one that means a lot to me in particular. All right, we got that one going on. So I have kind of a strange musical upbringing. My parents raised me on Michael Bolton and Phil Collins. So playing a Hercules song by Michael Bolton. Anybody know Michael Bolton, right? Anybody alive in the 80s rolling their eyes? Yes, I know Michael Bolton, right? He's just about as epic as it gets. And unfortunately, we're not playing on a mountaintop with wind in our faces and giant Marshall stacks for the guitar. Little Marshall stack, mini stack, little mini thing. All right, I'll wait till we get the lyrics up first. I tell you, before we did this assembly today, I watched Mulan yesterday and I watched Pocahontas. I'm in the mood. I haven't watched Hercules in a while. I need to get back on that, but that is a very solid one. This is sort of the last, Disney, I don't know if you remember, used to hire one artist to do all the music from a whole movie. I think this is one of the last ones. Like they had Elton John do all the Lion King, they had Phil Collins do all the Tarzan stuff, and Michael Bolton did the main number from this movie. So this is Go the Distance. Aha. There we go.
I have often dreamed of a far-off place where a hero's welcome will be waiting for me, where the crowds will cheer when they see my face, and a voice keeps saying, this is where I'm meant to be. I'll be there someday. I can go the distance, I will find my way. If I can be strong, I know every mile will be worth my while. When I go the be worth the wait. It might take a lifetime, but somehow I'll see it through, and I won't look back. I can go the distance, and I'll stay on track. No, I won't accept defeat. It's an uphill slope, but I won't lose hope till I go the distance, and my journey is complete. Oh yeah. But to look beyond the glory is the hardest part. The hero's strength is measured by his heart. Like a shooting star, I can go the distance. I will search the world. I will face its harms. I don't care how far. I can go the distance till I find my hero's welcome waiting in your arms. I will search the world. I will face its harm until I find my hero's welcome waiting in your arms.
Thank you. This is the part of the program where we have everybody please stand and meet your neighbors. Hopefully you meet somebody you haven't met before, and then afterwards I'm going to call you back and we're going to do a little bit more of announcements and things. guys. All right, everyone, I have some more stuff to bug you with. Sorry to cut off your conversations, but they can resume right afterwards. We can all eat tacos. So I have some announcements for you. Obviously, we have food afterwards and a ridiculous number of toppings, so enjoy afterwards. Every Sunday Assembly, we have a charity, a non-monetary charity. So, like, for example, in the winter, we had a coat drive for free coats. We've done business clothes drives. And what we're doing, we're now switching to a quarter system so that instead of having a different charity each month, in case you forget, we're going to do the same charity we did last month, and we're going to do the same one next month. So we're looking for toiletries to donate to the Chicago Food Depository. We had somebody from our congregation that was dependent on food banks, and he said that, you know, just finding a pack of razors was just the greatest thing ever, because you'd have to use one rusty razor for a month and a half. So we're looking for shampoos, razors, soaps, any kind of toiletries, especially feminine hygiene products. And you can leave them over by our donations basket. Speaking of donations, the space isn't free, and we rely completely on donations. You can give cash in the basket over there, or we also have a PayPal account online. Last month we talked a bit about how we're kind of in the red. Rent here is $250, and then we spend a little money on reimbursing for food, but we're just barely making do, so if you can give generously, that would really help us out so that we can keep this going. We are 501c3. It's all tax deductible. Can't really determine whether or not we're an effective 501c3, but you can look at it as more, you're helping yourself a little bit. Maybe you're investing in your own community as opposed to giving back to another. Yeah, we will. You go ahead and fund that. But after we buy a second speaker system, if we have a little extra money for that. We also have 5 members of the board of directors, as well as several volunteers that aren't on the board of directors. One of them resigned, so we have a quick election just for the next 2 months until our main election. So there's an election over there. There's only one person on the ballot, but if you'd like to do a write-in candidate or just to confirm, yes, I want this one person, that's also over by the donations. So please do that if you would like. We are also in dire need of volunteers. We only have 2 or 3 people that are really making this thing go every day, and we're getting burned out a little bit. We really do need more volunteers, and this is just like speaking at a Sunday Assembly. We're also looking for people to be on the planning committee, which will get all of our emails. That will, you can come to the board of directors meeting. Our next one is April 3rd in Hyde Park. So sign up on that. You can come to the directors meeting, see what goes into this. We have very ambitious goals for this organization if we can get the manpower. So speaking to that, we have things called small groups, smoups. If you wanted to host a book club or a movie night or a knitting smoop or a queer smoop, these are all things we've had in the past. We can provide the PR and the people if you just provide the location and the thing. So it's pretty easy. We want to make this community really be a lot broader and really be a bigger umbrella group. So if you're interested in doing that, let any of us know. Definitely email us at the main Gmail account. If you're not on the email account, please sign up over there or email us. We'll put you right on. We use a MailChimp server, so if you haven't been getting our emails, please check your spam folder. Board meeting April 3rd, smoops, election, charity, tacos. Those are all the announcements I have. Any other announcements? Do we have any questions from the congregation about Sunday Assembly? Any questions? No questions? Yes? Yes, the question was, we had a discussion last one about whether or not we're going to stay a Sunday Assembly, and the overwhelming consensus from the board and from the people here was like, yeah, we don't have to be a Sunday Assembly. For those of you who weren't here, the International Sunday Assembly puts a lot of requirements on us to call ourselves a Sunday Assembly that are, in our opinion, insane, especially because we're a local organization, and what do we care what people 4,000 miles away say in London? So we get very revolutionary, you know, right? We got the old Brits, the redcoats, coming over us telling us how we're going to run our Sunday Assembly. Yes, this British guy over here. Phil's British. I'm going to keep telling people at every assembly. Nobody knows it. He does this fake Boston accent just to cover it up. So yes, that is something we're looking at, different options. The only deadline is the end of the year, is when we've been 2 years, and then they're going to require that we be accredited in this insane process. Problem is that we haven't had a board meeting really in 2 months. And so this is my point about volunteers. We're lacking in the people to get stuff done. So we need people to volunteer and want to run this thing. This is just, works on a little bit of elbow grease. If you have a little time to put in and help plan with us, that'd be great. Any other questions? Cool. We have a tradition now, which is a fairly new tradition. We always end with a song called Parting Glass, which is an old Irish folk song, which I think is a beautiful symbol for saying goodbye to everybody, and I'll see you again next month. So guys, you want to come up? And if you don't know the words of this song, you should know the words of this song, because we're all going to sing it every single Sunday night.
Okay. That's never.
Oh,